in the not-too-distant future, following the rapid succession of World Wars III and IV, plus the hidden horrors of secret World War II. There's not much left. All that remains is a place where folks get together to read and discuss comic books. Sometimes they laugh, sometimes they argue, but they always record and upload their transmissions. You've found one of those transmissions today. Welcome to the last comic shop.
Hey! It is now time for more of the last comic shop! And I'm the host with the most, Andy Larson, and welcome back to another great week of our program. In fact, it's a lucky week for all you fans, because you get another episode, right? Is that why it's lucky, Chad?
That's right. If you're feeling green or enthusiastic about the color, I got nothing for this. I don't care.
You know what I love about you, Chad? Sometimes you're honest with some of the curveballs I throw you on this show. That is my regular co-host, Chad Smith, as always. And I'm also joined by my other co-host, J.A. Scott. J.A., what is your favorite part of St. Paddy's Day with a double D, not a double T, right? Is that correct?
That is correct. I would say the thing I don't understand about St. Patrick's Day is why people would resort to drinking green beer when you can just drink Guinness.
Exactly. It does have its own color, and it is a much better beer. Like, I would much rather have a glass of Guinness than just, I don't know, Coors Light with some green food coloring dumped in it.
Yeah, and keep looking behind you the next day like, what happened?
In any case, somebody that never has to look behind them is our wonderful co-guest host for today's program, and that is, of course, the wonderful comic book creator from the city of Pittsburgh. That is the wonderful Mikey Wood. Mikey, we love having you on this program, and thank you so much for joining us for this St. Paddy's Day celebration.
That's do
you have any good stories about the Luck of the Irish?
You know, what's funny is, like, I came from an Irish Italian family. My father's side of the family was Irish, and my mother's side of the family were Italian. So the street fights were great. Like, we didn't have family get-togethers. We had fights for turf, brouhahas, corned beef and pasta. No, the Shamrock shakes, man. The only milkshakes I like taste like toothpaste, and that's the way I want it.
They are so good. I wait every year. It's like some people wait for the McRib. No. I wait for the Shamrock shake.
Oh. Remember Grimace's uncle, Paddy Grimace or whatever his name was?
I do.
Yeah.
See, I am one of those guys that feels like the day that McDonald's land left our popular culture was the day something inside of us all died. I really do believe it. We don't have the Hamburglar anymore. I don't care if it makes kids obese. Give me back the Hamburglar and the Fry Guys, damn it.
We described this stuff to Zoe, my daughter. She's 13, and she just thinks that we were stoned our whole childhood. And I'm like, no, honey, this was real.
We had talking McNuggets, and then we had talking raisins.
Yes.
They played saxophones.
Yes. The only way you could get me to eat something is if I saw it talking in a commercial previously.
That's right.
That's it.
I don't want to get too far off of this on this tangent, but if you ever have an opportunity to look up, like, the whole whatever happened between McDonald's and Sid and Marty Krofft, who originally came up with some of the McDonald's land characters, and like the lawsuits that happened between these organizations because they came up. Because if you look at it and you look at then HR Puff and stuff, it's the same pretty much concept. And so Sid and Marty Krofft came up with a lot of the ideas for the original McDonald's land characters and then tried to sue the pants off of McDonald's when they were like, no, these are our characters. We love Captain Crook with our McFish, our McFish sandwich.
Yeah,
these are some of the little known ones, Mayor McCheese. But in any case, this is the last comic shop. We are not here to talk about Shamrock Shakes, and we're not here to talk about St. Paddy's Day. We're here to talk about comics. And real quickly, as our first kind of salvo into comic books today, we are going to list our favorite comic book characters that either are green or have green in the title. And we're going to start off with Chad Smith. Chad, who is your favorite green comic book character?
I'm going to go out of left field. I'm going to say the Phil Urich Green Goblin.
Wow!
The kid that got his own title for a little bit, and then they're like, never mind. Then they forgot him about it for 30 years, and then Dan Slott brought him back, turned him into a bad guy, and he's dead now.
Why do you like him so much? I won't lie. I like when they brought him back as the Hobgoblin. He kind of had some menace to him, but like, why that Green Goblin instead of cornrows?
You know what? Harry Osborn had his arc, but then they screwed it up. And then Norman Osborn had his arc, and then they screwed it up. But Phil, they gave Phil his arc. They forgot about him. They're like, we'll throw you a bone, we'll bring him back. And like you said, the Hobgoblin part was still fun. And now he's dead.
Is he of relation to Ben Urich?
Yes, he's his nephew.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
This is all new to me. I thought there was like 2 Green Goblins.
Oh.
There's 20 of them. I didn't know.
Exactly. It's a franchise. It's like McDonald's. Any case.
Exactly.
J.A., what's your favorite comic book character that's either green or has green in the title?
I'm going with someone who is green, the Impossible Man.
Very, very cool. I should have known as a Silver Surfer guy that you would go about that, because I remember you talking nonstop about that issue where the Silver Surfer and Impossible Man square off as one of your favorites.
He's great if you need one issue of levity. You've just gone through the Infinity Gauntlet, or you're about to go into some other big crossover event and you need a filler issue. It allows the writers to do in one issue what I think John Byrne did over 8 issues of this She-Hulk run that we're about to look at today, which is just get your comedy chops on and be a bit flagrant about it. That Impossible Man makes his way into the MCU.
Yeah, and I hope so too. I hope they do him well with CGI for sure. Mikey, as our guest, who is your favorite character that either is green or has green in the title?
I'm realizing as I'm listening to you guys that so many of my favorite characters are all green to begin with. So like there's Ambush Bug and Ragman and Swamp Thing, and I'm going to go with Green Arrow, and specifically Mike Grell's run of Green Arrow. From like the Longbow Hunters, and then he did I think like 80 issues of a regular series. I just like that. It brought him down to a more ground level. He didn't really use trick arrows or anything. And what was interesting is that he aged in real time in the comic. So every year he had a birthday and he got older and older and older, which doesn't usually happen. And actually that comes up in She-Hulk a little bit. But anyway, so
we've talked about that before, Mikey, and I came through the Longbow Hunters like 30, 40 years after it was published, and it didn't do it for me, but I know I didn't give the regular series a chance, so I'm sure.
Yeah, it's fun, but it's more of a sort of cloak and daggery kind of book. There's some supervillains periodically, but it's a lot of like mobsters and Russian, because it was 89, whatever, so everything was Russian. But yeah, it's good. I liked it.
It wasn't the 80s Batman bad guys where they always were in gangs and had mohawks.
No. But that was mine when I was in high school. That was my guy. So anyway.
All right. Well, mine is going to be, of course, the Green Hornet. I'm one of the few folks out here. Well, Mikey likes the Green Hornet as well. In fact, we kind of had a little bit about who was going to bring up the Green Hornet. But if you've never had an opportunity, even nowadays, to read the recent series, not so recent, but in the last 10 years, Dynamite's put out a couple good Green Hornet series. Year One, which was done by Matt Wagner, as well as then followed up by another run that was done by Mark Waid. Both of those, again, kind of encapsulate what the Green Hornet should be. They're both set in the 1930s. They really deal with a guy that's really trying to bring down crime by becoming the head of his own criminal organization, which I always thought was an interesting wrinkle. Like the guy that's like, yeah, I'm going to pretend I'm a criminal to take down other criminals. Is he really pretending? I don't know. That's the thing. Like walking that moral line, and when does pretending become reality? I always thought was a really cool thing about the Green Hornet, as opposed to other superheroes that kind of have that same, vigilante mentality, whether it's the Shadow or Batman or whatever. But I can highly recommend the Green Hornet, whether you're, again, the Dynamite stuff, or even go back and read the comic books from the Now series in the 90s. I was a huge fan of that, where they tried to make the Green Hornet like multi-generational, and they try to incorporate, the Bruce Lee Kato and all that stuff. Great stuff out there, and you can find it in buck bins. You can find it in buck bins. Super easy.
What's your favorite Green Hornet mask? Do you like the one with the hornet on it? Do you like the, what's that called, the domino?
I like the full one. Yeah, I like the full mask, the full face mask from like the 1940s. The enormous yellow hornet right on the front. Like, I want people to see the Green Hornet from a mile away because they're like, look at that guy with the mask. He's the best.
Yeah.
Any case, you know what also is the best? Last Comic Shop. We'll be right back with more of this program right after these messages. Again, it's going to be a review of another green character, the Sensational She-Hulk by John Byrne. So stay tuned.
Hey everyone, Brian Thomas here from the former The Batman vs. James Bond show and the upcoming The Night Cave show. Do you like noir, black and white gritty murder mysteries? Do you like crime stories or even pulp comics? Then you're gonna love Nick Palatichuk's debut graphic novel entitled The Greenway. It's 1968, and Butch Schultz, a black market merchant, finds that his friend has been murdered in a mansion in St. Paul. Now he is out looking for who did it, while the city's best detectives are on the case. Nick's graphic novel is already getting rave reviews, let me tell you. Zero Supervision Comics podcast says, a dark, intriguing story that makes you want to know more. The Glenn Thinks Stuff podcast says, it's explosive, captivating, and alluring. And actor Kyle Hester from The Chair, Zombie with a Shotgun, and Preacher 6 says, can't wait for this book. You gotta get on this. Order your copy today at Indie Planet, A New World of Comics. That's www.indieplanet.com. Hard copies and digital copies are available, and now digital copies are only $5. That's where I said it, just $5. So make sure you order yours today.
All right, we are back with more of The Last Comic Shop here on our St. Paddy's Day celebration. And of course, as always, we've got to do something green. So on today's program, we're going to do a book that my cousin J.A. recommended. It is covering a green character. It is covering the Sensational She-Hulk. Not only just the Sensational She-Hulk, but the first 8 issues of the fantastic series that was written and drawn by John Byrne in, I think it was 1989. I believe this
As of this recording, I have not yet completed my John Byrne Superman run, so I haven't started reading it yet. But this was right off of the heels from that? Somebody help me out.
Yes, it was. And he basically was at Marvel, and he did X-Men, and he did Fantastic Four, right, Mikey? And then he left, he did Superman, and then he came back. And I know he did some things like he did Avengers West Coast when he came back. That's with the whole White Vision run and the Scarlet Bitch and all that kind of stuff that was going on there, bringing back Jim Hammond. He also created the Great Lakes Avengers during that time, which is kind of tapping into that kind of funny aspect, that kind of tongue-in-cheek humor that John Byrne had. What else did he do around that time, Mikey?
You're talking around that time. I know earlier he did the Indiana Jones comic, which I thought was pretty good. And Alpha Flight, he did Alpha Flight, but that's like 83. That was earlier. Untold Legends of Batman, I think he wrote some of. Starbrand was the new universe, which is why there's that new universe joke in She-Hulk.
He was on Iron Man, except he wasn't drawing it at the time. That's when he brought in Armor Wars 2. He was working with John Romita Jr. and kind of made the Mandarin his big bad guy again. Brought back Fin Fang Foom. He was also doing Namor, where he made Namor that environmentalist, I should say, that environmentalist, and did the first 25 issues before he handed it off to Jay Lee. In terms of the... He
was still writing, but he turned him back into a hobo, like Fantastic Four days.
I do remember that. I remember Hobo Namor.
He did a OMAC miniseries that I remember that was black and white, which was weird for DC.
Okay.
Yeah, believe it or not, I'm really not crazy about John. I don't know. I know it's blasphemy and everything like that, but I never really got into him. But I've owned a few. Like he did the Batman 3D book that they put out. It was like a 3D graphic novel. That was pretty fun.
Well, in any case, we're going to get the 10-cent synopsis because we went over who this was, of course, John Byrne. But Mikey, can you fill us in on the 10-cent synopsis of the first 8 issues? Again, available in trade. That's why we picked this up, because you can get this in a trade, the first 8 issues. But what happens in the first 8 issues of Sensational She-Hulk?
John Byrne gets She-Hulk in her underwear as many times as he can before he gets fired. No, that's not it. No. It's actually a really fun book. She-Hulk realizes that she's a comic book character, and wacky hijinks ensue. That's really it. Like it's a fun little book. It really is.
Well, I do know that one of the big things that he did, one of the focuses on this particular series, was to bring back a lot of obscure, almost D-list characters from the 70s and 80s. I don't know if he just sat down one day and decided, I'm just going to read Steve Gerber's Defenders just from beginning to end, because you get the headsman.
Since this is a podcast, you're not doing these characters justice without describing them. Ruby Thursday, beautiful woman's body. Ruby red ball for a head.
Yeah.
That has a plasticized arm that can come out of it or can shoot darts.
My theory is that it's Plastic Man. It's Plastic Man the whole time. But it's an unofficial crossover.
How do you describe the gorilla guy with the gorilla body and the human head? and
then there's a guy whose skeleton is too small for his body, which is really weird because his gimmick isn't a head. Everybody else's gimmick is a head. And then there's the psychic guy who's
Chandu the Mystic.
Who they're trying to find a body for, because in the first issue, whenever they where they reveal him, he's on some bizarre vulture tentacled kind of thing.
Yeah, and that is a follow up again from that Defenders series. I mean, they basically put him in that body after many fights with the Defenders, because originally they tried to put his body into the original Nighthawk. And that failed because the Defenders saved Nighthawk. I'm a huge fan of the Defenders. Like they're my jam. From Bronze Age books, I love the Defenders. So I was really happy that they showed up. But you get them, you get the Mysterio in this series. Oh, one of my faves. And he brings back the Toadmen. The Toadmen from Incredible Hulk #2.
So you guys know all of that. I'm unfamiliar with a lot of that. Being a DC boy, I'm unfamiliar with the sources of these things.
So spells it out for you in the issues. He's like, well, it's the second issue. We got the Toadmen.
Well,
it's fourth issue. There's going to be a doctor.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
Dr. Bong.
Speaking of which, another obscure character from a Steve Gerber book, Dr. Bong, shows up in one of the issues, and again, made me smile from ear to ear. But I don't want to talk about my initial thoughts. We're going to start with J.A. Scott, because that was his pick for this week. He wanted to read Sensational She-Hulk. Why did you want to read this book, J.A.?
It's your fault.
That's my fault. Yes, it's all my fault. I'm a big John Byrne fan from his X-Men run. I had read the occasional She-Hulk story here and there back in the day, and so I wanted to revisit it and read them all in a set. We did the first 8 issues because this is in a trade. I don't know if he got canned after issue 8. I do know that was off the book and then he came back later on. I don't know if that was right after issue 8, right after Santa Claus.
Yeah.
They wanted to do a miniseries, a She-Hulk miniseries of some sort, and I can't remember who's on that. But the editor, Bobby Chase, who is actually in a little cameo, I think in the 3rd issue. Is it the 3rd issue?
It's one of them, yeah.
Yeah, she's in a little window thing. Like, they do this really cool time cut anyway. But there was conflict between she and John Byrne, because John Byrne's, he's one of those creators that's prolific and famous and an enormous jerk. So his ego clashed with editorial, who probably had egos involved there. And so really the debate wasn't even about this particular She-Hulk book. It was about another one. And he felt that he was being rewritten by editorial, which is probably true. And she ended up getting fired. And he was off the book until issue 31 when she left. So he came back. And I haven't read anything past there, but I am curious. This got me... because as I said, I wasn't really much of a Byrne fan, but I enjoyed this. I actually found myself enjoying. I enjoyed the art, And usually my deal with John Byrne is that John Byrne draws 4 faces. He draws a fat guy and a skinny guy, a fat girl and a skinny girl. They're all the same faces with different hair. And it's always bugged me ever since I was a kid. I was like, that's the same face. Like, you know, there's a shadowy bad guy sitting in a car at one point and it's just his Lex Luthor from Man of Steel. But I never got into him. He's notoriously cantankerous online. I'm sure it's died down since. But man, I actually was reading this book and really digging it. Like, I like it.
Well, as somebody that likes John Byrne's art, J.A., and has been a big fan, like, does he have 4 faces, or are you going to stand up for your boy?
I can see there is, especially with the guys, they tend to run very similarly. They all sort of look, the men, especially the heroic men, have the chiseled jaws. You change out their hair color, and it could be Clark Kent. I get that. I think it works in She-Hulk because the main character is taller than everybody else and green. So you always know who you're looking at a bit on that one. I would say a lot of the books and series that we look at on this show tends to be like one sort of contained story arc over 12 issues, over 8 issues. This was a throwback to the way, you know, comics were done in the 80s and the 90s, where you have like the first 3 issues have kind of like a story arc, but then issues 4 and 5 are just standalone 1-issue stories. Issues 6 and 7 is another self-contained 2-issue story arc, and then the last issue, as we said, the one that got him canned or on a different book, was Santa Claus, maybe a bridge too far. That being so, I enjoyed kind of going back to my roots in comic books and being able to read a 1-issue self-contained story done really well. I thought some of them worked better than others. I really didn't like the Dr. Bong issue. I thought that was where the shtick went almost too far. The fourth plane went too far. I thought where it worked was when she was making sly references to John Byrne or to editorial or to editor-in-chief Tom DeFalco. I thought that set the standard for what they ended up doing with Deadpool later on to some degree, where they're breaking the fourth plane and talking to the viewer and knowing that they're in the medium while they're also telling the story in the medium. And I figured that this is the comic book that you can only do if you have a lot of cachet in the industry and history already. If you're not John Byrne, this comic doesn't get done. Okay. And my final thought is what I loved about it is if you look at it as a time capsule in its time and place, everything else coming out at this time was really gritty. 1989, 1990s, gritty Punisher, Daredevil, all these gritty comic books that were dark, and, you know, X-Men was going through all this stuff. And this is just light and fun and frivolous and has all these inside jokes that are written by the artist and by the writer for the industry. So I figured this is something that, just like you said, bringing all these old characters back, it's like, hey, why not? I've got carte blanche. I can do what I want. I'm going to have fun with these 40s, these 50s, these 70s era characters, have all these inside jokes about comic books as a medium, because this is meant to be a fun book. It's not meant to be so dark and serious.
Well, I just got to jump in before I'm going to kick it over to Chad by saying you're completely wrong about issue 4 with Dr. Bong. Completely wrong. The best line in the entire 8 issues comes from that book where they basically say to She-Hulk in no uncertain terms, you will be 31 as long as you are in comics. That kind of metafictional humor hits me right here. It hits me right here. I am a fan of the Marx Brothers. I am a fan of the Fourth Wall. I am a fan of knowing that you are a part of the inside joke. And that statement about how somebody desperately wants to get back into comic books so they will no longer age like Captain America or Namor was the best. Chad, what are your thoughts on this?
There's a line, and I have to keep reminding myself that this book is a product of its time, because there are some times where the metafictional stuff works, and there's sometimes where it's just kind of cringy and eye-rolly, and it's like, oh, okay, I get it, Byrne. A lot of times I don't give it as much credence just because, in my mind, it's all Bugs Bunny. I mean, this is Bugs Bunny, only it's a big green Bugs Bunny lawyer. Deadpool is Bugs Bunny with guns and knives. Like, they're all just Bugs Bunny and when they're breaking the fourth wall and doing that stuff. But I did love the fact that, like Jay said, this guy can do what he wants, and what he wants is space truckers. So he's bringing that back. And I loved him dipping into the 40s and the Golden Age heroes, and, like, that was really cool. What was her name? Golden Goddess?
Blonde
Phantom?
Something.
Phantom. There you go.
Yeah. She was a real Golden Age character, actually. She came out in All Select Comics number 11 in 1946, which was during the Timely Times. Yeah, I thought maybe they made her up for the
truckers.
book.
They were real characters too.
That US1. That was the US1 book, which was a Tycho RC crossover thing or whatever they call license thing.
Anyways, Chad, what I wanted to say was, again, I feel like at times in this series there were things that happened that would be later repeated in series that you and I really enjoyed. Like, I'm not saying this is on the same lines as a Next Wave. Next Wave!
Oh my God, I was going to mention that.
But at the same time, I feel like this particular series and Next Wave are kindred spirits in some way, in terms of poking fun at particular comic book rules. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I can see where you're coming from. Honestly, and this is going to sound real bad, I just think this is the height of excess. This is John Byrne, post X-Men, post Superman. He's done everything the industry has wanted him to do, and now he's like, you know what? I want to draw fashion stuff. I want to draw, stuff that would appear in an architecture magazine. He's just doing whatever he wants to do because he can. And, like, on the art side of things, I like John Byrne's art. I don't care how many faces he has. Love the issue with Spider-Man, and you could see where he's kind of torn between, like, he did tons of work on Spider-Man and the Marvel team-up days, and, like, he's torn between that and the new McFarlane, like, super popular, big-eyed Spider-Man, and he kind of goes back and forth a little bit. I thought that was fun, and when the comedy stuff worked, I enjoyed it. When it didn't work, like I said, I rolled my eyes. I'm like, all right, 80s book. I don't know. I fall somewhere in between on this one, where there are parts of it, like I said, that were really good, and then parts of it that, I could have done without.
It's weird because I'm sort of I liked a lot of the meta stuff, crossing through the panels, the joking about transitions. There's one joke where they go to show a tag on her underwear because, again, she's in the underwear, and it's the Comics Code Authority logo thing.
Yeah. That's why it can't be ripped.
Yeah, right. And then in that same issue where they're kind of running through the comic pages, they cross over one of those. I think it was like a Mile High Comics ad that they used to have in all the books back then. If you stop and read that, there's little jokes in there. There's little jokes written in there. Underneath the nom, there's a little thing, a description where they talk about scoring some weed and things like there's little jokes in there, yeah. And that stuff was hilarious. But I can't believe me of all people is saying this, but I think his characters talk too much. Like, I love dense comics and I talk too much, but there are times where I'm reading it and I'm like, oh my God, they just keep talking and talking and talking. And the joke was funny 2 dialogue bubbles ago, but I think my favorite is like the close-ups of She-Hulk's face with these little reactions.
Yes.
And then they do the whole head issue where they remove her head, which the Shadow book from DC did in December of 88 and January of 89. The last issue of that Shadow book was his head being put onto a robot body. And they never went anywhere with it because the book was canceled after that. So I wonder at the end of that episode where they see a tiny little head inside the robot She-Hulk body, if that's supposed to be someone, like an in-joke that nobody knows but him, because there's a lot of that in there.
I was hoping that you'd bring up the face panel, because another one I enjoyed was, again, I liked it any time that She-Hulk was either talking to Byrne or saying, like, what gives Byrne? I thought this was like supposed to be the Creo to Skrulls, and you give me Toadmen, or the fact that there's one issue where it's just basically her face, and she's like hanging upside down or whatever, and she gets pied in the face because she's telling really bad dad jokes, like the jokes that I would tell, and so those kind of moments just kind of made this series for me. I'm not going to go on record saying this is the best thing since sliced bread, because I'm not. As we'll get to our grades later on. there were some things that I disliked, but one thing that I wanted to ask everybody, and I'll start with JA on this particular thing is, do you think that John Byrne works better when he gets to split the writing/art duties?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's a hard question because you can't really compare this to like the X-Men stuff, right? The stuff he did with Chris Claremont, that's much more serious, if you will. It's got a longer play involved, but without that, he can't do this. So if he hadn't done the X-Men, if he hadn't done all that stuff in DC, he wouldn't have been able to do this She-Hulk book. I think the writing is stronger in the X-Men. You know, it's apples and oranges. You're comparing sort of almost two different genres. So yeah, I don't think you can say, well, one is better than the other because they're different things.
All right, Chad?
So, okay, I'm going to go back to when I talked about this as an exercise in indulgence. Like, there are parts of this that are really awesome, and it's cool to see John Byrne explore those things. And then there are other times that because he's the guy writing and drawing, he can take shortcuts just because he wants to. Like, some of his transitions and his shortcuts, he cuts out the most interesting parts. Like, when she attacks Stiltman and just grabs his legs and splits him. I want to see that panel with the Stiltman coming apart. But, you know, he makes that choice that I think, you know, if he were the artist instead of just the writer-artist, you know, I think he might have had to commit that panel to the page. And I'm thinking of how to put this. Like a guy like Frank Miller, he's a guy that has a singular artistic vision that appeals across a wide swath, and, you know, he does what he does really well. I don't think John Byrne has that. I think he has glimmers where it comes through and it's like, wow, that's really good. But I think he's somebody that's best paired with someone who's going to tamp down some of his instincts and keep him more focused on what's what.
Okay. Mikey?
Most of the stuff that I've read of his work is stuff that he wrote. Like, and I think I'm one of a handful of people that I don't like Man of Steel. I really like his designs for Kryptonian clothing, though, in Man of Steel. I think they're phenomenal. No, I really do. I think it's super cool looking. But that's just me. I like my Superman, you know, in the 1930s throwing people out windows and stuff like that. But, like, it sort of probably depends on the writer, you know, because if you've read a script by someone like Alan Moore where he describes every single detail of the panel in utter detail and it doesn't leave the artist with much room to move, that's one thing. But if the script is like, you know, the Marvel style where it's like Captain America and Namor fight each other for a couple of pages, you know, then that, you know, I'm not really sure. He may be a little more constrained if it's his own writing. He may skip things that other writers would focus on. Like the Stiltman thing was interesting because I read that and I was like, what the hell just happened there? Like she says, make a wish, and then she moves her arms, and then I was like, okay, I get it, you know, because then he falls into her arms from out of the suit, and that was funny. It's weird because I wish I had a better answer for that. Then I'm not sure, but I'm not sure.
Well, that's okay. I mean, my simple answer is I don't know. I like when they're split up. You know, the first person I think of that's a writer artist sometimes is Jack Kirby. Like I go back to Kirby stuff, and I'm still like, I like Kirby when he's paired up with other people. Sometimes Kirby, he's not really the best, you know, writer when it comes to his stuff. I've read New Gods.
He's a crazy person.
Yeah. The ideas are great, but without that other collaborator.
Yeah, you need that bombast of Stan Lee just filling in that. So I think, honestly, the only time it ever worked for Byrne was on his Fantastic Four run. That's the one time I can say yes. And I think, honestly, it's because it came on the heels of his X-Men run. So he was kind of like, yeah, I just picked up all these tricks from Chris Claremont, and they're fresh in my brain. So I'm just going to use them here on my Fantastic Four run, and that's why it works. But I will say this. The one thing I really do love about John Byrne's writing is, I believe it or not, despite him putting She-Hulk in her underwear all the time, at least for the 1980s, John Byrne tried to make his female characters somewhat empowered. Whether it was with She-Hulk in this and how strong she is, how confident she is, how she can take care of business, or whether it was with Jean Grey or Kitty Pryde, or most importantly, Invisible Woman, because keep in mind she was the Invisible Girl before John Byrne got his hands on her. I mean, these were characters that weren't given a lot of street cred and really power before John Byrne got his mitts on them, and ultimately at the end of the day not only made them pretty to look at, but made them a force to be reckoned with. And so kudos for him for at least moving the needle a little bit towards what we would see from these characters nowadays. I'm just saying that.
I want to argue this point, and I'm going to sound like a huge jerk, but empowering She-Hulk, that's great. But the problem is when you're drawing a funny book, you don't want someone that's that beautiful and that competent. It's harder to get the humor in those situations. You want, like, I go back to Giffen and DeMatteis and the JLI. Like, they were hilarious because they had no idea what they were doing. They were schlubs. That's what made them great. And Jennifer Walters, she's too competent. She's too beautiful. She has too much going for her. So that's, I think, while he's trying to empower this character and empowering females, go for it. That's awesome. But at the same time, for a comedy book, like, it's not working as well as it could be.
Yeah, this is definitely post her being in that Fantastic Four run where he kind of had an opportunity to kind of, I don't know, humanize her and kind of beautify her and kind of give us kind of like that Greek goddess-esque She-Hulk that we know. J.A.?
She was a lawyer before she became She-Hulk, and then she's a lawyer after she becomes She-Hulk. But one thing I noticed, it was never done for like, oh, she's a lawyer, she's super, super smart. So it was always a lawyer and sort of good at the law, but never written as being very super intellectual. Not dumb by any means, but kind of sometimes missing the obvious. I remember an issue where I think it happened in Silver Surfer or right during the Infinity Gauntlet crossover where he comes to Earth and he's walking around Avengers headquarters and she like stops him and says, "What are you doing here?" and goes to punch him and, hits him and it doesn't affect him. And he's like, I'm the Silver Surfer. I came to meet. And Captain America's like, "Stand down, Avenger. Don't you know that's one of our friends?" She goes, "Geez, it was an honest mistake."
Yeah. I think it's just Marvel dialogue in general. She-Hulk and Spider-Man, you could replace them in each other's panels and the dialogue would work for either of them because they sound the exact same. He uses the same speech pattern for, and I think it's a Marvel thing, like the Shulky, and they have all these nicknames and he says blast. Nobody talks like that. Like nobody says blast. But I know comics code and all that stuff.
One way that we always say blast is by going to a commercial break. That's what we do here on the show. We say blast, and then there's a commercial break that comes right after it, or at least on this program. And we've got more of the Last Comic Shop coming up right after these messages. We're going to be coming back with our ratings for the Sensational She-Hulk, the first 8 issues, so stay tuned for that.
Blast.
Hey, this is Ken M.
Padawan J.
Coach Duffy.
From the Ocho Duro Parlay Hour podcast. Every week, the ODPH is talking sports, movies, TV, comics, and more. It's always a parlay of topics on each episode. You can find the ODPH on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Stitcher, Podbean, and wherever you find great podcasts, such as the one you're listening to right now. Don't forget to check out OchoDuroParlayHour.com, where you can find the links to all of the ODPH social media accounts, links to the bands whose music you hear each week on the show, hashtag 607 podcast info, and parlay points, our companion blog section of the show. Thanks for listening to the ODPH. Now get back to your regularly scheduled podcast.
All right, we are back with more of the Last Comic Shop, and it is now time for our ratings, where we assign worth in this final evaluation of the Sensational She-Hulk.
And we didn't give credit to the other folks. We didn't give credit to Bob Wyachek, who did the inks for every issue except for 6, which was Al Golden. Glynis Oliver and John Workman on letters.
John Workman letters. They're a mile high if they're a centimeter. Those John Workman letters, they're the best.
The letters are very workman-like.
Well, I will say this, that the one guy that I always love John Byrne working with is always Terry Austin. Anytime you get Terry Austin inks on John Byrne stuff. That's what makes it. But anyways,
hey, Andy, before you go, the Rob Liefeld podcast. I know Mikey Wood's a huge Rob Liefeld fan. The Rob Liefeld podcast talks about how he loved all these guys at Terry Austin Inks, and then one day somebody said to him, "Do you think maybe you just might be a Terry Austin fan?"
And we're
I'm not a Rob Liefeld fan, and in fact, you could look up a letter of mine that I wrote in X-Force number 12 that says just that.
Oh, wow! You guys published? Holy sh! Now all our fans are gonna be finding this X-Force number 12 just so they can read the letter from Mikey Wood. What did you talk about in the letter?
It was a flashback issue that showed Cable's time with Grizzly and all those people. You know what I mean?
The Wild Pack.
The Wild Pack. Thank you. And that issue was drawn primarily by Mike Mignola. And I wrote in the letter, it was like, don't get me wrong, I like Rob just fine, but after a while it gets to be like Mom's meatloaf. So and the reply was like, Rob forgives you for the Mom's meatloaf response. And yeah,
laying the smack down.
I had a subscription. You know what? I was one of those guys who saw him show his crotch on a Levi's commercial, and I thought, you know what? I want to buy this guy's comic. And I got a subscription. So number 12 was the last of my subscription, and it had my letter printed in it. And I thought, you know what? This is as good a place as any to go because this book is garbage. And so I never bought another issue.
You're breaking my heart.
I never bought another issue of X-Force because I thought, you know what? This is as close as I will ever be to having my name in an X book. But and I sold those back when Deadpool hit, and I got a lot of money for the Deadpool first issue.
There you go.
And that was nice of him.
So anyways, good story about this letter. We're going to get back to our rating. And, of course, J.A., as always, we do it on a 1 to 4 scale. But J.A. always likes to mix it up every week. What are we going to be rating our 1 to 4 scale out of this week, J.A.?
All right. Well, this comic book is all about breaking the fourth wall. So we're going to rate this book on number of walls broken. 1 through 4.
Nice. I like it. Because I had a sound effect for that. You just heard it. I have a sound effect for wall breaking. I'm loving this. Unlike these other weeks where you leave me out hanging to dry to find something great on the internet, I had one already. So we're going to start off with, of course, J.A. Scott. This was his book. He gets first dibs at saying, what is he going to rate this?
So I rate this 3 broken walls. It was fun. I liked the in-jokes. I didn't mind the fourth wall breaking so much. I felt that some of the stories were stronger than others. My favorite 2 issues were the space trucker issues. You had a nice little cameo appearance by the Guardians of the Galaxy. She-Hulk gets mistaken for a Skrull, and we ain't got no place for laser-licking Skrulls here. So I love those little bits. Solid 3 broken walls.
Okay. Chad, your rating?
Geez Louise, I guess I'm going to go 2.5 broken walls. I mean, there are parts that I really enjoyed. I really like the John Byrne art. There were gags that were good, and there were gags that were not. But She-Hulk was always, wonderful to look at. And I like some of the side characters. But 2.5. I think this is a pretty solid example of what comics were like in 1989, which was a lot of 2.5-star comics.
Oh, Mikey, what's your rating?
I forgot you mentioned sound effects. I like that they use the sound effect Blair. Is it Blair or Blar? They use it a lot. They use it a lot. Anyway, I'm with Chad on this one. Like I'm gonna say 2.5. Like it's like perfectly fine book. It is funny in a lot of places, and if you're more into or more knowledgeable of kind of the Marvel stuff, you may get more mileage out of it than I did. I knew US1, like the Space Truckers. I knew US1 from how just utterly bizarre that comic. If you've ever read US1 comics, I've read a few of them. It's so bizarre. It's about truckers. It was a toy. It was based off of a toy line. It's certainly worth reading. It's certainly worth reading. A lot of people love it. John Byrne draws really cute feet on ladies. So yeah, and that's me saying a lot because I think you guys might have actually forced me to turn a corner on John Byrne, and I may have to do a little more research on it.
Okay.
And read the FF run and things like that.
Well,
So-
see, that's what we do on the Last Comic Shop. We expand people's
That's right.
minds. in
This
terms
was a
of comic
therapy
books.
session for me. This
Yes!
you've gotten me
Yes,
over
we
a
turned
hump,
you
and I
around.
really appreciate that.
I'm going to say this is a good solid 3 walls broken for me. I would have given this easily a 4 if it hadn't been, believe it or not, for these issues that everybody seems to be loving, which were the trucker issues. I was not a huge fan of the trucker issues, nor was I a fan of the issue with Santa Claus. Like, at that point, I felt like things started to kind of peter out in terms of the gas.
His plaid made me angry. They kept drawing it as straight up and down lines. That's not how plaid works.
Well, you know what does work, though, is those first couple issues. I was a huge fan of, I think, the first 4 or 5 issues of this run. It reminded me so much of why I love comic books. I love the fact that you could do a comic book like this in the 1980s when, again, to everybody's point on this show, people were just interested in the body count of the Punisher was, or how many people Wolverine could kill, or how gritty and dark Spider-Man was. I mean, but you had this fun, tongue-in-cheek book that brought back a lot of just, again, D-list characters that nobody cared about, but that was part of the joke. Nobody cares about the headsmen. That's part of why you put them in a comic book. Like, that was the one thing that I always say. Like, it's one thing when you pick up comic books and they're making fun of the characters. It's also another, like, when you're laughing along with the characters, when you're, like, part of the joke. You're not just making fun of it just to make fun of it. You're just like, no, this is part of the gag. And we're all in on it. And the fact that She-Hulk is talking to John Byrne, and the fact that she's wearing a Comics Code tag on the inside of her jumpsuit so she can't get her clothes ripped, by the fact that she can't age beyond 31 because she's in a frickin' comic book. I love these things. I love Dr. Bong. I love frickin' Dr. Bong. He's from Howard the frickin' Duck. If you haven't read Steve Gerber's Howard the Duck series, you, sir or madam, are missing out.
Wow.
Pick that up today. That should be my recommendation, but it's not going to be because I got a better one. And that's what we're going to next. Recommendations. As we always on this program, we give you other comic books that you should pick up at your local comic book shop, in addition to the trade that you can pick up with the first 8 issues of Sensational She-Hulk. And of always on this program, we're going to do a similar book, a current book, and one out of left field, although I don't even know if we're going to be doing those rules on this show because we came up with these books and just said, whatever. Well, we got the cherry on the top, and that is from Mikey Wood. So on today's program, I'm going to give what's called the current book. And this isn't really exactly current because it's a couple years back, but it's as current as we're going to get on this frickin' podcast. And that current book is a fantastic one starring another She-Hulk that doesn't happen to be green, but happens to be red. If you've never checked out the Red She-Hulk book that was written by Jeff Parker with art by Carlo Pagulayan, and not only does it star Red She-Hulk, which is always an interesting character. For those folks that don't know who Red She-Hulk is, that's Betty Ross. That is the long-suffering partner of Bruce Banner, who basically got Red She-Hulk powers at the same time as her dad did, Thunderbolt Ross, and basically became Red She-Hulk, empowered for the first time, kind of feeling her oats, out there trying to make her way as a superhero. But that's not really the reason that you read this series. I will be very honest with this. As folks that know me, the reason you read this series is because it's got Machine Man in it. And if anybody can write Machine Man, boy, it is Jeff Parker. Jeff Parker manages to write a fantastic series where he gets to be the ego to Red She-Hulk's id. And the result is like an impulsive yet deliberate, clever yet soulful, just right mix of chaos and mechanical order. And by the end of this book and this series, both characters genuinely like each other. And although X-51, a.k.a. Machine Man, starts playing psychologist to the lost and damaged Betsy Ross, who, again, has just had a really terrible time over her years as a character, By the end, She-Hulk really takes kind of the responsibility of protecting him and really stepping up to the plate as a superhero. Plus, they have a road trip, and they go and meet Mole Man, and they have dinner with Mole Man. How great is that? So, yes, if you have an opportunity to pick up, it's in 2 trades. The first trade is called Hell Hath No Fury. The second trade is called Madlands. But Red She-Hulk, written by Jeff Parker, I can't recommend that enough. J.A. is going to hit us up with his out of left field pick. What is that for this week?
Yeah, so this kind of wraps into both my favorite green character as well as She-Hulk. I mentioned that She-Hulk meets up with the Silver Surfer and doesn't recognize him, but in that exact same issue, the Silver Surfer meets up with Impossible Man. And this takes place in Silver Surfer number 36, which comes 2 issues after the return of Thanos. This you can find in multiple trades, the run-up to Infinity Gauntlet. It's just been published in my favorite format, the Infinity Gauntlet Omnibus, which gives you Silver Surfers 34 through 38, 40, 44 through 60, Thanos Quest 1 and 2, all of Infinity Gauntlet, Cloak and Dagger, Spider-Man, Incredible Hulk. It's just a great issue. There's 2 of them, actually. The previous one, he also appeared in Silver Surfer 33, which is not, unfortunately, in any of these omnibuses, but I'm sure you can find that for pretty cheap in dollar bins somewhere out there. Just great early 90s Silver Surfer stuff.
Absolutely. And if you don't have a lot of that cabbage to throw around on those omnibuses like my cousin seems to have, again, you can pick this up in Silver Surfer Rebirth of Thanos. It's a trade paperback. And again, it's got those same issues, except not all the stuff with Infinity Gauntlet. It just has those Silver Surfer issues. And what I consider a much better story than Infinity Gauntlet, which is Thanos' Quest. If you've never had an opportunity to read Thanos' Quest number 1 and 2, that is a much better story than Infinity Gauntlet. And some people might fight me on that. But the wrong. Chad, what is our, I guess, similar pick on this?
Yes, I'm going to go similar time period. I'm coming right out of the John Byrne era when he was in charge of, or when he was at DC doing Superman, and they gave the reins of the Justice League to Keith Giffen, J.M. DeMatteis, and Kevin Maguire for the what eventually became known as the Justice League International. But they let him have Batman and nobody else. No Superman. John Byrne was doing all the Superman. No Wonder Woman. George Perez was doing all the Wonder Woman. So you got Batman, and that's it, and a bunch of jobbers. And it was wonderful. And I recommend the whole thing. It ran for like 55 issues or so until they kind of dropped the humor gimmick. But if I had to narrow it down, there were so many great moments. Later on, when Fire and Ice join the team, and there's Guy Gardner's their rough and tumble character who, thinks he's tougher than he is when he goes on his date with Ice, and it's the date with density, drawn by our pal Russ Braun.
There you go.
But most people know Justice League. They'll know it for, in the very first trade paperback, issue 5, for the punch. Yes. Where I talked about Guy Gardner, who's this abrasive character. He's like Wolverine without the charm. He's just so obnoxious that he's running off of the mouth, and Batman drops him with one punch. And that by itself would be awesome. But what's even better is DeMatteis and Giffen and Maguire, they spend the rest of the page just with the reaction shots of Blue Beetle and Booster Gold laughing in the background and making fun of him. And just all those character moments that shine through in this book that repeatedly, like throughout the run, they would lose access to characters. They start off with Captain Marvel, and they're like, you know what, we want to put him in a real book. We're taking him away. They're like, it doesn't matter, we'll put somebody else in. They start out with Black Canary. She only lasts 6 or 7 issues. We'll throw somebody else in. But they were able to make chicken soup out of chicken scratch, and the whole JLI run, I think, is awesome. But the first trade in particular, it's a highlight. Giffen, DeMatteis, Kevin Maguire, JLI, check it out.
All right. Mikey Wood, what is our cherry on the top for this week?
Well, first, I'm sorry, I would be remiss if I didn't mention this to people. Issue 9, the next issue after John Byrne's run on She-Hulk, the title of the story is Burnout, and there's actually an arrow on the first page pointing to the title, and it says, get it, with a question mark, Burn Out, and it's drawn by Brian Hitch.
Wow.
Back then in 1989, 1990. So that might be his first work. Anyway, My recommendation has nothing to do with any of that. About maybe a month ago or so, you guys did a really good episode on Road to Perdition. And since it was not live, I couldn't call in to lambaste you or to mention not sequels so much as in-between quels. Because, the Road to Perdition, the original book, is very much just the vendetta that he has against the Roonies, or the Loonies in the case of the book. There are graphic novels that came out afterwards, and actually 3 prose novels that came out afterwards that take place in between the events of the original graphic novel. And they're all from Paradox Press. There's Oasis, Sanctuary, and Detour. They're about 100 pages each, but they collected them all into one edition. Jose Luis Garcia Lopez draws them, and he's magnificent.
Oh, wow.
It's different. It's different. Garcia Lopez is amazing, but the prior was a completely different vibe altogether. So, but anyway, they're very good. They expand the story, and the Irish mob element with St. Paddy's Day and everything is why I chose those.
Very cool.
So there you go.
All right, well, that's all the time we had for the last comic shop this week. Mikey Wood, real quickly, do you want to tell everybody where they can find your fantastic comic book work?
Yeah, you know what? My 2 graphic novels are still available on Amazon. One is called Hate Your Friends, and one is called Pack of Lies. If you go on there and say Hate Your Friends, Mikey Wood, or Pack of Lies, Mike, they should come up. And they're print to order, so you could order them, and I thank you for that. The first part of El Phantasma is available on graphitecomics.com, and actually so is Hate Your Friends. So if you don't want to spring to buy the actual print version, you could read it online for free, because I'm nice like that. But other than that, I work from home. I'm in my apartment every day, so if you guys ever want to find me. There I am.
All right. Well, where you can find us every week is at www.lastcomicshoppodcast.com. It is our fantastic little website that we have where you can rate, review, and subscribe to any of the fantastic places where you can find our podcast every single week, whether it's Apple Podcasts or Google Play or Stitcher or Spotify or YouTube or Amazon Podcasts or, I don't know, your grandma's house. I mean, we do that too. Any case, you can also follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Last Comic Shop. But JA, what can they find every single day at lastcomicshoppodcast.com?
They can find merch, and lots of it. T-shirts, hoodies, cozies, masks. You name it, we've got it.
And there you go. And while we may be the last comic shop, we're probably not actually the last comic shop near you. You can go to comicshoplocator.com to find a comic shop near you. Or if you're like Mikey, who spends a lot of time at home, staying safe, staying out of trouble, you can always go online and find some wonderful businesses to mail order comics through. But we love the folks supporting this industry and keeping the comics that we love coming out on a regular basis.
I'm going for the whole Howard Hughes thing. Like, I want the neighborhood kids to make an urban legend about me. Like, they're like, I saw him bring his garbage out last night. No, you didn't. Yes, I did.
As long as you're not keeping mason jars full of your own toenail clippings, I think we're just fine with that. Any case, that's all the time we had for this week. The Last Comic Shop. I am the host with the most, Andy Larson. I was joined by Chad Smith, J.A. Scott, and of course Mikey Wood for this week. And until next week, folks, stay safe, stay sheltered, and if you can, break as many fourth walls as humanly possible. They're out there.
And structurally, you only need 3, honestly. Structurally, your home will stay up with 3.
Exactly. We're past tense right now. We're living in teepees or bungalows. We need 3 walls. That's fine.
Flare! Scream!
The Last Comic Shop was a 2021 Black Angus production.